I don't think lazy in the way that it's known today is inherently wrong. I think people who have no goals or aspirations, it's usually not by default. It's usually because maybe they've just been like worked to an absolute pulp that has caused that to happen. I don't think people are inherently like lackluster in the sense
Yeah.
of lazy. And then the other sort of way that people use lazy is like not constantly aspiring for more. And I also don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with that. Although a lot
Yes.
of people would probably beg to differ.
Well, there's such a movement right now too with toxic positivity and like always
Yeah.
wanting to improve yourself. And it might seem ironic because we talk about a lot of these topics too. And I think that they are
Hmm.
important and they can have all these positive benefits in our lives when we use them as tools, but anything to the extreme can be
Agreed.
unhealthy. Yeah.
I've heard that as I've been taking a bit of a spiritual journey recently because I think minimalism and simple living sort of becomes like the launching pad to a lot of things, whether it be spirituality or like money management or whatever. And in my instance, because I haven't had this infatuation with stuff or overfilling my time, I've been jumping into some spiritual. I'm not quite sure where I land, but it's an exploration at this point. And I've been noticing a trend with Western and Eastern sort of ideology, whereas Western ideology seems to value the goal. Once you've achieved the goal, you will be happy. Whereas Eastern, by default, seems to value the journey more and the strength you garner along that on that path as the happiness. And I think that's probably not unilaterally true. It's not like all Eastern countries necessarily believe that, but I have noticed a little bit of a trend and difference there. And I think it would be easier if we had just grown up in a culture like that to kind of get these ideas because we as humans are so much of what we're taught. But I don't think that it can't be undone later in life. It just takes a lot of intentionality. And I think there's a little bit of that ideology in slow living as well, even if it's not necessarily given a name or like an origin.
Yeah, you hit on a lot of things there that I think were really important. Just the difference between Eastern and Western cultures. I think it's also important to note most Eastern cultures are more collectivistic, whereas more Western cultures are more individualistic, right? So that I
Mm-hmm.
think that also plays a role in why we might be seeing it more as here it's like the mentality of picking yourself up by the bootstraps and that kind of narrative has been so strong in our society for so long that it's still a huge, I think I would say a lot of millennials are questioning it, a lot of Gen Z young people are questioning
Yeah.
these stories that we've been told that have been passed down to us. But certainly, I would say in a Western society, especially in America, remaining unbothered about the opinions of others, if you want to live slowly, is so important because,
Mm-hmm.
and boundary setting are crucial too to maintaining a slow pace of life because you're right, it is not the norm here.
It's
it
the
is
default to be fast. Like it
Yes.
happens by accident to be quick. All of a sudden, your schedule is just filled up. You're totally right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, slow living is certainly counterculture. I personally, I think a lot of people come to it slow living not really because they're like, oh, I'm going to try slow living in the same way like I'm going to try minimalism. A lot of people get
Get
so burned
fried.
out like I did when I was testing that it's
Yeah, I think
like
they get fried. You're right.
I was so focused in high school, on achievement. I wanted, I was the 4.0 kid. I was focused on the awards. I did running start in high school, meaning, I got my first 2 years of college knocked out junior and senior year so that I could get my bachelor's in 2 years. I didn't think
Damn.
that was enough. I remember thinking like, oh, I want to take this gap year, and I don't think I would have known what slow living was at the time, but I certainly knew that I needed a break, right? And I wasn't listening to that
Mm-hmm.
inner voice. I was listening to a society that was telling me to continue to focus on achievement all of the time, the kind of never enough. Um, so I think that the real work is seeing that we're enough already. We have enough
Yeah.
already. We do enough already. And to
Mm-hmm.
just practice slowing down.
And having pride in the work you've already accomplished. I think so many of us are constantly jumping to the next thing. Even me, like my husband and I, we bought our house, and it was probably 6 months later that I was already looking towards like my next big goal in my young adult life. And I think gratitude ties into it a little bit as well, because if you have gratitude, it really brings you back to the present moment of what's happening now. And I do, going back to what you said about bootstraps, I do think there are times and places where that mentality is very much needed. I think it gets toxic when it's the only mentality that's there. Let's take,
Mhm.
we'll take current day tragedy. You look
Mhm.
at war and people who were affected by war and didn't intend to be at this time, they need to have that mentality of pull yourself up and we got to do what we got to do because this is happening to us without our consent. So I think in times of high stress and struggle, that mentality isn't inherently wrong, because sometimes you just really need to like get up and like march forward because shit's fucked up. But it's when that's the day-to-day norm of just like existing that I think it does harm to our body and mind.
Absolutely. You led perfectly into my next question, which is it ever appropriate to go fast? And you just said, in times of crises, you're going to have to respond. You're going to have to
Yeah.
react in crisis situations. One thing I wanted to say is that I don't know if it was paramedics or firefighters. I'm not sure which one. It's one or the other. They have a saying that it's something like, it's one of those tongue twisters.
Of course it is.
Go, but it's about going slow to go fast, but it's like fast is slow and slow is smooth, if that's what it is. Fast is slow and slow is smooth. And so
Mm,
I don't think we would think of paramedics or firefighters as people who move very slowly. I think I would have thought of them as people who move very quickly in crisis situations, like the people right now who are experiencing crisis and having to evacuate very quickly.
well, it's so hyper focused, I think, when you're at a time of emergency, instead of having this mentality of fast, 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 and multitasking 30 different things every single day, 7 days a week, it's very much like, okay, this is our focus now, and we can move fast with this one thing. So I think that would be an appropriate time for faster moving. I also think there are times in life where life gets busy, and that's okay. That's just sort of the way life goes sometimes, especially the way we've built some of our infrastructure in this country and also the Western world. So I think by default, if sometimes that happens and it slips away from you, that's okay, so long as you kind of bring it back and you bring like your mind and heart back to the present. So it's not maybe ideal, but it is a necessity because we can't really change the structure of what we live in right now today single-handedly. It's like don't hate the player, hate the game. So
Yeah,
sometimes you have to play that game. And I think in certain instances, if it's temporary, it's also I don't want to say appropriate, but like mandatory.
yeah, no, it is. I think that what you're touching on here, Brooke McCallery, she's an author and a different podcast host of the Slow Home podcast. She
Mm-hmm.
talks about pivoting, because I think there's this misconception about the slow living movement that it is always, baking bread at home, living in that cottage, being
Yeah, with the
going out
dress and the bare feet.
and cutting your fresh herbs out of your, it can. And I mean, it's an inspiring idea to me to live like in these ways, but anyone.
Thanks so much for watching that short clip from the Simple Does It podcast. If you're interested in seeing more from Kylie or Jennifer, please click the top link in the description of this video. That'll take you to our Patreon where you can check out our exclusive Simple Does It podcast. Thanks in advance.